Katie Brennan stood in the transport ship and looked out the window at the biggest space station she had ever seen. Orbital Station Verith hung in the darkness like a metal city. Thousands of lights blinked along its surface. Ships moved in and out of its many docking ports. This was the center of the unified galactic coalition, where species from across the galaxy came to trade, talk, and try to live together in peace. Katie was 26 years old. She had just finished her studies in xenobiology, the science of alien life. She had spent years learning about strange creatures on distant worlds. She had worked with dangerous animals on Earth. She had a gift for understanding beings that others found scary or impossible to reach. That gift was why the coalition had called her here. The transport docked with a soft thump. Katie grabbed her bag and walked through the airlock into the station. The air smelled different here, a mix of recycled oxygen and something she could not name. Aliens of all shapes and sizes moved through the corridors. Some walked on two legs like humans. Others floated, crawled, or slithered. Katie tried not to stare, but it was hard. She had read about these species in books. Seeing them in person was something else entirely. A security officer met her at the arrival gate. He was a tall man with tired eyes and a serious face. His uniform said his name was Ryan Cortez, and his rank was commander. "You must be Katie Brennan," he said. His voice was flat, like he had given this speech many times before. "That is me," Katie replied. "Follow me. We need to talk before you start your assignment." He led her through a maze of corridors until they reached a small office. The room was plain, with a desk, 2 chairs, and a window that looked out at the stars. Cortez sat down and motioned for Katie to do the same. "Do you know why you are here?" he asked. "The message said something about working with the Kethra," Katie said. "But it did not give many details." Cortez let out a long breath. "The Kethra are one of the newest species in the coalition. They joined 3 years ago. Before that, they were isolated on their homeworld. Most species avoided them. Why?" "Because they are predators," Cortez said. "Apex predators. They evolved to hunt and kill. They are 8 feet tall, covered in black fur, with claws that can cut through metal. Their eyes glow in the dark. They are fast, strong, and very protective of their own kind." Katie felt a small chill run down her spine, but she kept her face calm. "I have worked with predators before." "Not like these," Cortez said. "The Kethra are intelligent. They have technology, culture, language, but they still think like hunters. They do not trust easily. Most species on this station are afraid of them. The Villari will not even be in the same room as them. The Morthans have tried to get them removed from the station entirely." "That seems unfair," Katie said. Cortez shrugged. "Fair or not, that is the situation. The Kethra are isolated here. They keep to their own section of the station. They do not mix with others. Diplomatic relations are fragile at best. So where do I come in?" Cortez slid a data tablet across the desk. "The Kethra ambassador has made an unusual request. She wants a human to work in their nursery." Katie blinked. "Their nursery? With their children? With their cubs? Yes. The Kethra have been watching humans for months. Something about our species interests them." The ambassador would not say what. She specifically asked for someone with experience handling dangerous animals. "Your name came up?" Katie looked at the tablet. It showed images of the Kethra, and Cortez had not exaggerated. They were massive, muscular, and covered in sleek black fur. Their eyes were amber and seemed to glow even in the photographs. They looked like something out of a nightmare, but Katie had learned long ago that looks could lie. Some of the most dangerous creatures she had worked with were small and pretty. Some of the gentlest were large and scary. "I will do it," she said. Cortez raised an eyebrow. "You do not want to think about it?" "No, if the Kethra are reaching out, that means something. I want to help." Cortez studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right. I will take you to meet the ambassador." They walked to a section of the station that felt different from the rest. The corridors were wider here, the lights dimmer. The air was warmer and carried a faint smell that reminded Katie of a forest after rain. Other species hurried past this area without stopping. Katie noticed security cameras on every corner. At the end of the corridor stood 2 Kethra guards. They were enormous, even bigger than Katie had expected. Their amber eyes tracked her as she approached. She could see their claws, long and curved, resting at their sides. Cortez stopped a safe distance away. "Ambassador Vrethan is expecting you? I will wait here." Katie swallowed and walked forward alone. The guards did not move as she passed between them. She could feel their eyes on her back. A door slid open, and she stepped into a large room filled with soft light. The ambassador was waiting. Vrethan was tall even by Kethra standards. Her black fur was streaked with silver, a sign of age and wisdom. Her eyes were the color of liquid gold, and they fixed on Katie with an intensity that made her want to step back. "You are the human," Vrethan said. Her voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. "I am Katie Brennan," Katie replied. She kept her voice steady, even though her heart was beating fast. Vrethan walked in a slow circle around her. Katie stood still and let herself be examined. She knew this was a test. Predators respected those who did not show fear. "You are small," the ambassador said. "Soft, you have no claws? No fangs. Your eyes do not see in the dark." "That is true," Katie admitted. "And yet your species has spread across the stars. You have tamed worlds. You have faced creatures far larger and stronger than yourselves." "How?" Katie thought about the question. "We adapt. We learn. We do not give up." Vrethan stopped in front of her. Those golden eyes seemed to look right through her. "Other species call us monsters," the ambassador said. "They fear our young as much as they fear us. No one has ever asked to work with our cubs. No one has ever treated them as anything but threats." "Children are not threats," Katie said. "They are just children." Something changed in Vrethan's expression. It was small, just a slight tilt of her head, but Katie caught it. "Come," the ambassador said. "I will show you the nursery." She led Katie through another door and into a large room filled with soft bedding and climbing structures. The walls were painted with scenes of forests and mountains, the home world of the Kethra. And in the center of the room, playing and tumbling over each other, were 6 cubs. They were smaller than Katie had expected, about the size of large dogs. Their fur was fluffy and soft, not sleek like the adults. Their eyes were bright with curiosity. When they saw Katie, they all stopped and stared. Katie's heart melted. "They are beautiful," she whispered. Vrethan looked at her sharply. "You truly think so?" "Yes, they are wonderful." The ambassador was quiet for a long moment. Then she made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You are strange, human Katie. Most would run screaming at the sight of our young. You call them beautiful." One of the cubs, smaller than the others with a notch in her left ear, crept closer to the edge of the enclosure. She stared at Katie with wide amber eyes. "That one is called Kira," Vrethan said. "She is the smallest. The others sometimes push her away." Katie knelt down slowly, making herself smaller and less threatening. "Hello, Kira," she said softly. The cub tilted her head. Listening to the strange new voice, Vrethan watched this exchange with unreadable eyes. Then she spoke again. "You will observe today. Nothing more. The cubs must get used to your presence. If they accept you, we will talk about what comes next." Katie nodded. She understood. Trust had to be earned, especially from predators. She sat down on a bench near the enclosure and settled in to wait. The cubs slowly returned to their play, but Kira stayed near the edge, watching the human with endless curiosity. Katie smiled at her. It was the beginning of something neither of them could have imagined. The days turned into weeks, and Katie became a regular presence in the Kethra nursery. She arrived every morning at the same time, sat in the same spot, and watched the cubs with patient eyes. She never rushed. She never pushed. She simply showed up, day after day, and let the cubs decide what to do with her. The Kethra caretakers did not trust her at first. There were 3 of them, all female, all fiercely protective of the young ones in their care. They watched Katy with narrow eyes and kept their claws ready. She was an outsider, a soft little human with no fangs and no fur. What could she possibly offer their cubs? But Katy did not try to prove herself with words. She proved herself with actions. She learned the names of all 6 cubs. Kira was the small one with the notched ear, shy and often alone. Tarek was bold and liked to explore. Voss was quiet and thoughtful, always watching. Mila and Jin were sisters, always together, always playing tricks on the others. And Drath was the biggest, a loud and boisterous male who loved to show off. Katy studied their behaviors. She noticed that Kira always ate last, after the others had taken their fill. She noticed that Drath liked to climb to the highest point in the enclosure and survey his domain. She noticed that Mila and Jin communicated in a series of chirps and tail flicks that the others did not seem to understand. She brought this knowledge to the caretakers, sharing what she had observed. At first they dismissed her. What could a human know about Kethra cubs? But when she pointed out that Kira was not eating enough, they checked and found she was right. The small cub had been losing weight. They adjusted the feeding schedule so Kira could eat in peace. After that, the caretakers began to listen. Katy also brought gifts for the cubs. She spent her evenings designing puzzle toys, simple things that would challenge their minds and keep them busy. She made balls that rolled in unpredictable patterns. She made ropes with knots that could be untied for treats hidden inside. She made soft cloths in bright colors that the cubs could wrestle and play with. The first time she offered a toy to the cubs, the caretakers were suspicious. "What is this?" one of them asked, holding up the knotted rope. "It is a puzzle," Katy explained. "There is a treat inside. They have to figure out how to get it. Our cubs do not need human toys." "Maybe not," Katy agreed. "But it might be fun for them to try." The caretaker hesitated, then tossed the rope into the enclosure. Drath pounced on it immediately, batting it around with his big paws. When he could not get it open, he growled in frustration. But then Voss walked over, studied the knots carefully, and began to work at them with his claws. Within minutes he had the rope open and was enjoying the treat inside. The caretakers stared. "He solved it," one of them said. "Voss has never been interested in play before." "Every cub is different," Katy said. "Some like to run and jump. Some like to think and solve problems. You just have to find what makes each one happy." From that day on, the caretakers stopped treating Katy like an intruder. They still watched her carefully, but the hostility faded. She was not a threat. She was something else, something they did not quite have a word for. The cubs themselves were changing too. They no longer froze when Katy entered the room. Instead, they came to the edge of the enclosure, chirping and bouncing, eager to see what she had brought them. Drath would show off his latest climbing achievements. Mila and Jin would perform their synchronized acrobatics. Tarek would try to grab her hand through the bars, but it was Kira who made the biggest change. The small cub had become Katy's shadow. Wherever Katy sat, Kira was nearby. She watched Katy with those big amber eyes, tilting her head at every sound, every movement. The other cubs had accepted Katy as an interesting visitor. Kira seemed to see her as something more. One afternoon, it happened. Katy was sitting on her usual bench, reading reports on her tablet. The caretakers were busy with feeding preparations. The cubs were playing in the enclosure, chasing each other and wrestling. Everything was normal. Then Katy felt something touch her leg. She looked down and her heart stopped. Kira was standing beside her outside the enclosure. The small cub had squeezed through a gap in the gate that no one had noticed was wide enough for her. She was free and she had come straight to Katy. The caretakers saw what happened and went rigid. Their claws extended. One of them let out a sharp hiss of alarm. Katy did not move. She knew that any sudden action could be seen as a threat. She knew that the caretakers were ready to attack if they thought their cub was in danger. She knew that everything depended on what she did in the next few seconds. Slowly, very slowly, Katy turned her palm upward and held it out. It was a gesture of peace, of submission. She had learned it from her studies of Kethra body language. Kira sniffed her palm. Her little nose twitched. She sniffed Katie's wrist, then her arm, then the fabric of her uniform. Katie held perfectly still, barely breathing. Then Kira climbed into her lap. The cub circled once, twice, 3 times, then lay down against Katie's stomach. She let out a long sigh and closed her eyes. No one moved. Katie looked at the caretakers. They were staring at her with expressions she could not read. Shock? Anger? She could not tell. She has accepted you, one of them finally said. Her voice was barely a whisper. This has never happened. Never. No outsider has ever been accepted by a Kethra cub. Katie looked down at the small ball of fur in her lap. Kira was already asleep, her chest rising and falling with slow, peaceful breaths. A sound was coming from her, a low rumbling that vibrated through Katie's body. She was purring. I think she just wanted someone to notice her, Katie said softly. Someone to make her feel special? Very gently, she placed her hand on Kira's back. The fur was softer than anything she had ever touched. She could feel the cub's heartbeat under her palm, strong and steady. The caretakers exchanged looks. Then, one by one, they retracted their claws. We must tell the ambassador, one of them said. This changes everything. Word spread quickly through the Kethra community. A human had been accepted by one of their cubs. It was unheard of. It was impossible. And yet it had happened. Ambassador Vrethan came to the nursery that evening. She stood at the edge of the enclosure and watched as all 6 cubs gathered around Katie. Kira was in her lap. Drath was trying to climb her shoulder. Tarek was batting at her hair. Mila and Jin were tugging at her sleeves. Even quiet Voss had come close, sniffing her boots with interest. They love her, Vrethan said. There was wonder in her rough voice. She earned it, one of the caretakers replied. She earned every bit of it. The ambassador walked over to Katie. The human looked up at her, still half buried under a pile of playful cubs. Why? Vrethan asked. Why do you care so much about our young? They are not your species. They are not your family. Most humans would be afraid of them. Katie thought about the question. Around her, the cubs chirped and played, full of innocent joy. Because every child deserves to be loved, she said. It does not matter what species they are. It does not matter what they look like. They are just children trying to understand the world. And I wanted them to know that the world is not as scary as everyone makes it seem. Vrethan was silent for a long moment. Her golden eyes were unreadable. Then she did something that surprised everyone in the room. She bowed her head to Katie, a gesture of deep respect among the Kethra. You are a strange species, the ambassador said. I am beginning to understand why the galaxy does not know what to make of you. She turned and walked away without another word. But Katie saw something in her eyes before she left. It might have been hope. It might have been the beginning of trust. That night, when Katie finally left the nursery, she felt different. She had come to this station as an outsider, a curiosity, an experiment. Now she was something more. She was part of something. And in the enclosure behind her, 6 cubs watched her go with sad little chirps, already counting the hours until she would return. 3 months had passed since Katie first entered the Kethra nursery. She had become a fixture there, as much a part of the daily routine as feeding time and playtime. The cubs adored her. The caretakers respected her. Even the guards at the entrance had stopped watching her with suspicious eyes. It felt like home. Then the Morthans came. The Morthan Collective was one of the oldest powers in the Galactic Coalition. They were insectoid beings, tall and thin, with hard shells and compound eyes that showed no emotion. They had built their empire on trade and manipulation. They did not like competition. They did not like change. And they especially did not like the Kethra. The Morthans had fought against the Kethra joining the coalition. They called them savages, beasts, monsters unfit for civilized society. When the vote went against them, they had never forgiven it. Now, a Morthan delegation had arrived on the station for trade negotiations. And tension was running high. Katie was in the nursery when it started. She was sitting with the cubs, helping Voss with a new puzzle she had made when the alarms began to scream. Red lights flashed along the walls. The calm voice of the station computer filled the air. Warning. Containment breach in Sector 7. Unknown hostile presence detected. All personnel initiate lockdown procedures. This is not a drill. The HFY caretakers moved fast. They scooped up cubs and ran toward the reinforced safe room at the back of the nursery. Katie jumped up and grabbed Kira, who was frozen with fear. She passed the small cub to one of the caretakers and turned to grab Tarek. "Move, move, move!" she shouted. "Get them all inside." The cubs were crying now, making high-pitched sounds of terror. They did not understand what was happening. They just knew something was very wrong. Mila, Jin, Voss, Katie counted them off as they were carried into the safe room. Kira, Tarek, that was 5. Where was the 6th? Where is Drath? She yelled. One of the caretakers looked around with wild eyes. He was by the climbing structure. He was just there. Katie turned and saw the problem immediately. Near the far wall of the enclosure, a ventilation grate had been knocked loose. It lay on the floor, bent and broken, and Drath was nowhere to be seen. "He went into the vents," Katie said. Her blood turned to ice. "He must have panicked and run." "We cannot go after him," a caretaker said. Her voice was shaking. "We must protect the others. The lockdown means we stay here." "The lockdown means there are threats out there," Katie shot back. "Drath is just a cub. He does not know where he is going. If he comes out in the wrong place, if someone finds him and thinks he is a threat—" She did not finish the sentence. She did not have to. Everyone knew what would happen to a HFY cub found loose on a station full of frightened aliens. Katie grabbed a flashlight from the emergency kit on the wall. She ran to the broken grate. "What are you doing?" A caretaker screamed, "Getting him back." "You cannot. It is too dangerous. You are just a human." Katie looked at her. "He is scared and alone. I'm not leaving him." She dropped to her hands and knees and crawled into the ventilation shaft. The vent was dark and cramped. Katie could barely fit, her shoulders scraping against the metal walls as she pulled herself forward. The flashlight threw a weak beam of light ahead of her. She could hear her own breathing, loud and harsh in the confined space. Behind her, the alarms kept screaming. "Drath," she called softly. "Drath, where are you?" "It is Katie. You are safe." "Come out." No answer. Just the hum of the station systems and the distant sound of running feet. Katie kept moving. The vents branched off in different directions, a maze of metal tunnels that connected the entire station. Drath could be anywhere. He could have gone left or right, up or down. She had no way of knowing which path he had taken, but she knew Drath. She knew how he thought. When he was scared, he did not run away. He ran up. He liked to be high, to see everything around him, to feel like he was in control. She found an upward shaft and began to climb. It was hard work. The shaft was vertical and smooth, with only thin ridges for her fingers and toes to grip. Her arms burned. Her lungs ached. Sweat dripped into her eyes. But she kept climbing. Because somewhere above her was a terrified cub who needed her. She found him 3 levels up, huddled in a junction where 4 vents met. He was pressed into a corner, his fur standing on end, his amber eyes huge and wild. When he saw Katie's flashlight, he let out a pitiful whine. "Hey, big guy," Katie said softly. She pulled herself into the junction and sat down, giving him space. "It is okay. I found you. You are safe now." Drath did not move. He was shaking so hard she could hear his claws clicking against the metal floor. Katie held out her hand. "Remember me? Remember the puzzle toys? Remember when you finally figured out the one with the hidden treats? You were so proud. You strutted around for hours showing everyone." The cub's ears twitched. "I know you are scared. I am scared too. But we have to go back now. The others are worried about you. Kira has been crying since you disappeared." At the mention of Kira's name, something shifted in Drath's eyes. He was the biggest of the cubs, and he had always been protective of the smallest. Even when he was playing rough, he was gentle with Kira, slowly, very slowly. He crept toward Katie. She stayed still as he sniffed her hand, her arm, her face. His nose was cold and wet against her skin. Then, with a small cry, he pushed himself against her chest and buried his face in her neck. Katie wrapped her arms around him. He was heavy, almost 40 pounds of muscle and fur, and his claws dug into her shoulders. But she did not care. "I have got you," she whispered. "I have got you. Let us go home." The journey back was harder than the journey out. Katie had to carry Drath with one arm while pulling herself through the vents with the other. Her muscles screamed in protest. Several times she had to stop and rest, her body trembling with exhaustion, but she kept going. When she finally crawled out of the vent and back into the nursery, she found Ambassador Vrethan waiting. The ambassador stared at her. Katie knew she must look terrible, covered in dust and sweat, her uniform torn in several places, her arms wrapped around a clinging cub. But she did not care about that either. "I found him," she said simply. Drath lifted his head and saw the ambassador. He let out a chirp and squirmed in Katie's arms. She set him down gently, and he ran toward the safe room where the other cubs were waiting. She could hear them crying out in joy as they were reunited. Vrethan walked toward Katie. Her movements were slow and deliberate. Her golden eyes never blinked. "You went after him," the ambassador said. "During a security breach, alone, unarmed, you risked your life for one of our cubs?" Katie wiped the sweat from her face. "He was scared. I could not leave him. You could have died. I know. Why?" Katie looked at the ambassador. She thought about all the reasons she could give. She thought about duty, about her job, about interspecies relations and diplomatic importance. But none of those were the real answer. "Because he is just a kid," she said. "And kids should not be alone when they are scared." Vrethan was silent for a long time. The alarms had stopped now. The red lights had faded. Whatever threat had triggered the lockdown was over. Then the ambassador did something that Katie did not expect. She stepped forward and pressed her forehead against Katie's dot. It was a gesture Katie had read about but never seen. Among the Kethra, it was reserved for family, for packmates, for those bound together by bonds deeper than blood. "You are kin to us now," Vrethan said. Her voice was rough with emotion. "From this day forward, you are Kethra in all but body. You are one of us. May the ancestors of my people witness this truth." Katie felt tears prick her eyes. She did not know what to say. So she just stood there, forehead to forehead with the ambassador, and let the moment speak for itself. Later, after the cubs had been checked and calmed, after the caretakers had thanked Katie a dozen times, after the station had returned to normal, Security Chief Cortez found her sitting alone in the corridor outside the nursery. He sat down beside her without a word. "I heard what you did," he said finally. Katie shrugged. "It was nothing. It was not nothing. It was reckless, stupid, and probably violated about 50 different protocols." She looked at him. He smiled. "It was also the bravest thing I have seen in 20 years on this station." Katie smiled back, exhausted and sore, but somehow happier than she had ever been. "Thanks, Commander. Get some rest, Brennan. You earned it." He stood up and walked away. Katie leaned her head back against the wall and closed her eyes. Inside the nursery, 6 cubs were curled up together in a pile, finally at peace, and waiting for her to come back. The story of what Katie did spread through the station like fire. At first, it was just whispers in the corridors. A human woman had crawled through ventilation shafts during a security lockdown to rescue a Kethra cub. She had risked her life for a species that most beings on the station feared and avoided. It seemed impossible. It seemed like a story someone had made up. But then the security footage leaked. Someone in the monitoring station had saved the recordings from the nursery cameras. They showed Katie diving into the vent shaft. They showed her climbing through narrow passages. They showed her finding Drath and carrying him back to safety. They showed Ambassador Vrethan pressing her forehead against Katie's in the ancient Kethra gesture of kinship. Within hours, everyone on the station had seen the footage. Within days, it had spread to other stations, other worlds, other species. Katie Brennan became famous without even trying. The reactions were mixed. Some species were amazed. The Villari, who had always kept their distance from the Kethra, sent a formal letter to the human embassy expressing admiration for Katie's courage. The Lorn, a peaceful species known for their art and poetry, wrote songs about her. Diplomats who had never spoken to humans before suddenly wanted meetings. Other species were suspicious. The Morthans, especially, were furious. They filed official complaints with the Coalition Council. They claimed that Katie had violated lockdown protocols and put the entire station at risk. They demanded that she be removed from the Nursery assignment and sent back to Earth. Security Chief Cortez called Katie to his office to discuss the situation. "The Morthans are making a lot of noise," he said, sliding a datapad across his desk. "They have enough influence on the council to cause problems." Katie read through the formal complaint. It was full of legal language and technical violations, but the message was clear. The Morthans did not like what she had done. They did not like humans forming bonds with the Kethra. They wanted to put a stop to it. "What does Ambassador Vrethan say?" Katie asked. Cortez let out a short laugh. "She told the Morthan delegation that if they tried to remove you, she would consider it an act of war against her people." Katie stared at him. "She said that?" "Those were her exact words." The Morthans nearly had a collective stroke. He leaned back in his chair and studied her with curious eyes. "You understand what has happened, right? The Kethra have declared you a protected member of their clan. In 300 years of interstellar diplomacy, no non-Kethra has ever received that status. You are the first." Katie did not know what to say. When she had crawled into that vent shaft, she had not been thinking about diplomacy or politics or making history. She had just been thinking about a scared cub who needed help. "The council is intrigued," Cortez continued. "They want to know what makes humans different. Why we seem to be able to connect with species that no one else can reach." "I do not think there is anything special about us," Katie said slowly. "We just try. We show up and we try." "Maybe that is special," Cortez replied. "Maybe trying is enough." Over the following months, things changed on the station. The Coalition Council approved a new program called the Bridge Initiative. The idea was simple: place humans with species that were struggling to integrate into galactic society. Not as guards or diplomats, but as caregivers, teachers, and friends. The goal was to build bridges between worlds that had never been able to trust each other. Katie became the model for the program. She gave talks to new recruits, sharing what she had learned about working with the Kethra. She taught them about patience, about respect, about never giving up even when things seemed impossible. "The trick is not to try to change them," she would say. "The trick is to show them that you care. Really care. Once they believe that, everything else follows." Human volunteers were assigned to work with species across the coalition. Some went to live with the cold and logical Vishin, helping them understand emotions they had never experienced. Some went to the underground cities of the Morlo, bringing light and laughter to a species that had forgotten how to play. Some went to the orbital stations of the Kresh, building friendships with beings made of living crystal. Not everyone was happy about this. The Morthans continued their complaints. They said the humans were manipulating other species, gaining influence they did not deserve. They tried to block the Bridge Initiative at every turn, but their influence was fading. More and more species were seeing what humans could do. They were seeing the bonds being formed, the trust being built, the bridges being constructed across chasms that had existed for centuries, and in the nursery on orbital station Vareth. The cubs grew. Kira was no longer the smallest. She had gained weight under Katie's careful attention, and her confidence had grown with it. She still stayed close to Katie whenever she could. But now she also played with the others, joined in their games, and held her own in their friendly wrestling matches. Drath had become Katie's devoted protector. Ever since she had rescued him from the vents, he followed her everywhere. When she sat down, he sat beside her. When she walked through the enclosure, he walked with her. The caretakers joked that he had appointed himself her personal guard. Tarek had grown bold and adventurous. He was always the first to try something new, the first to explore a new toy or test a new climbing structure. Katie had started bringing him extra challenges, puzzles that were harder and more complex, and he loved everyone. Mila and Jin were still inseparable. Their secret language of chirps and tail flicks had expanded into something beautiful and complex. Katie had started keeping notes, trying to decode their communication. She suspected it was a form of twin-speak that even other Kethra could not understand. Voss remained quiet and thoughtful. He spent hours watching the others, studying their behavior, learning from their mistakes. Katie had given him books, picture books designed for young children, and he had taught himself to read. The caretakers could not believe it. A cub his age reading human books? It was unheard of. But perhaps the biggest change was not in the cubs. It was in the Kethra themselves. Before Katie came, the Kethra had kept to their section of the station. They had not mixed with other species. They had not trusted anyone outside their own clan. Now, slowly, that was changing. Kethra adults began to venture into other parts of the station. At first it was just one or two escorted by Katie or the caretakers. They visited the market levels, the recreational areas, the observation decks. They met members of other species and had conversations. They learned and were learned from. The fear began to fade. Not completely, not everywhere, but enough to notice. When a Kethra walked down a corridor, other species no longer hurried to get out of the way. Some even nodded in greeting. It was a small thing, but small things added up. Ambassador Vrethan watched all of this with satisfaction one evening. She came to the nursery and sat beside Katie on the bench overlooking the enclosure. The cubs were playing below, their happy chirps filling the air. "I have been reading about your species," the ambassador said. "Your history." Katie looked at her with surprise. "What did you find?" "Violence, war, cruelty. You have done terrible things to each other. Human Katie, things that would make even the Kethra flinch." Katie could not argue with that. Human history was not pretty. "But that is not all I found," Vrethan continued. "I also found kindness, sacrifice, love. You have gone into burning buildings to save strangers. You have given your lives for people you never met. You have built hospitals and schools and homes for those who have nothing." She turned to face Katie. Those golden eyes were deep and thoughtful. "You are a contradiction, your species, capable of such darkness and such light. I have been trying to understand how both can exist in the same beings." Katie thought about the question. She had thought about it many times before. "Maybe that is just what it means to be human," she said slowly. "We have the capacity for both. Every day we choose which one we want to be. Some days we choose wrong. But when we choose right, when we choose kindness and love and courage, we can do things that nobody thought possible." Vrethan was silent for a long moment. Then she made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Perhaps that is why you were the ones to reach us," she said. "The other species, they see our darkness and fear it. They do not understand that we also have light. But you see both. You accept both. You reach out anyway." Katie smiled. "We see ourselves in you, Ambassador. All the good and all the bad. That makes it easier." Below them, the cubs had stopped playing. They were all gathered at the edge of the enclosure, looking up at Katie with hopeful eyes. Feeding time was approaching, and they knew she always helped. Katie stood up. "I should go help with dinner." Vrethan nodded. "Go, they are waiting for you." Katie walked down to join the cubs. 6 furry bodies pressed against her as she entered the enclosure, chirping and bouncing with excitement. She laughed and tried to give each one a pet and a scratch. But there were too many paws and too many tongues and too much love. From her bench, Ambassador Vrethan watched. "This," she thought. "This is what the galaxy needs. Not warriors, not conquerors. Just kind hearts willing to reach across the void and take a stranger's hand." She would make sure the council understood that, no matter what the Morthans said. Danny Scott was nervous. He was a junior security officer on his first month of rotation at Orbital Station Vareth. Fresh from training, eager to prove himself, and absolutely terrified of his current assignment. the Kethra wing, everyone at the security academy, had heard stories about the predator species. 8 feet tall, claws that could cut through metal, eyes that glowed in the dark. The instructors used them as examples of the dangerous aliens officers might encounter. Nobody actually wanted to encounter them, but someone had to patrol the Kethra section, and Danny had drawn the short straw. He walked through the wide corridors with his hand hovering near his sidearm. The lights were dimmer here than in the rest of the station. The air was warmer, carrying a strange scent that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He kept his eyes moving, scanning every corner and shadow dot. So far, so good. He had passed a few Kethra adults in the corridor. They had looked at him with those golden eyes, but they had not approached or threatened him. They had simply walked by, going about their business like anyone else. Maybe the stories were exaggerated. Maybe this would not be so bad. Then he reached the nursery. The nursery was located at the heart of the Kethra section, behind multiple security checkpoints and guarded doors. Danny had clearance to pass through, but the guards still examined his badge carefully before letting him in. Predator species were protective of their young. Everyone knew that. Danny stepped through the final door and into the nursery. It was a large, open room filled with soft bedding and climbing structures. The walls were painted with images of forests and mountains. The light was gentle and warm. And it was quiet. Too quiet. Danny's pulse quickened. The nursery was supposed to be full of activity. Where were the caretakers? Where were the cubs? Had something happened? He moved forward slowly, his hand now resting fully on his sidearm. His training told him to call for backup, but his curiosity told him to investigate first. He was probably overreacting. There was probably a simple explanation. He rounded a corner and stopped dead. There, in a corner of the enclosure, was a pile of fur and fabric that took his brain several seconds to understand. Katie Brennan was lying on a mound of soft bedding. Her eyes closed, her breathing slow and deep. She was fast asleep, and surrounding her, arranged in a careful circle, were 6 Kethra cubs. They were not playing. They were not sleeping. They were grooming her. The smallest cub, a female with a notch in her ear, was working through a section of Katie's hair with her rough tongue. She was gentle and methodical, smoothing out tangles and straightening strands with infinite patience. Another cub was doing the same on the other side of Katie's head. His amber eyes focused with concentration. 2 more cubs had curled up against Katie's back, their small paws kneading gently against her uniform in slow, rhythmic motions. A 5th cub lay across her feet like a living blanket, his fluffy tail wrapped around her ankles, and the 6th, the largest of them all, had positioned himself between Katie and the door. His amber eyes were fixed on Danny with an expression that was impossible to misread. Warning, protection, do not come closer. Danny's hand fell away. From his sidearm, he knew about predator grooming behavior. He had learned about it in his xenobiology classes. Among pack species, grooming was reserved for family members, for those who had earned the deepest trust. For the Kethra to groom an outsider, to groom a human, was something that had never been recorded in all of galactic history. Until now. Danny slowly raised his communicator. He kept his movements small and unthreatening, very aware that 6 pairs of golden eyes were now watching his every move. "Commander Cortez," he said quietly, "you might want to come to the Kethra nursery, and sir, you should probably bring a camera." 20 minutes later, Security Chief Cortez stood beside Danny, staring at the scene with an expression of pure wonder. "She fell asleep during her shift," Cortez said slowly. "And instead of waking her up or calling the caretakers, the cubs just started taking care of her." Danny nodded. "Look at how the big one is positioned, between her and the door. He is guarding her. If I had tried to get closer, I think he would have stopped me." "That is Drath," Cortez said. "She rescued him during the lockdown a few months ago. Crawled through the vents to find him when he got scared and ran. I heard about that. The whole station heard about that." Cortez was quiet for a long moment. His eyes were soft, his usual stern expression replaced by something that looked almost like awe. 300 years, he murmured. 300 years of trying to build relationships with predator species. 300 years of diplomacy, treaties, trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and none of it worked as well as this. He gestured at the sleeping woman and the cubs surrounding her. All it took was someone being kind. Someone showing up every day and treating them like they mattered. Someone willing to crawl into a dark vent shaft to rescue a scared child. "She is really something," Danny said. "Yeah," Cortez agreed. "She really is." They did not wake Katie. Cortez made a note in the security log that she had been found safe and sound in the nursery, engaged in interspecies bonding activities. He also attached a copy of the image that would later become famous across the galaxy, the human woman sleeping peacefully while predator cubs groomed her hair. An hour later. Katie stirred. At first she did not understand where she was. She felt warmth all around her, soft fur pressed against her body, and a gentle tugging sensation in her hair. Then memory returned and she smiled. She had been so tired. The cubs had been extra energetic today, running her all over the enclosure with their games. She had sat down for just a moment to rest her eyes, and then ... Kira chirped beside her ear. The small cub nuzzled her cheek with a cold nose. "Hey, little one," Katie murmured, still half asleep. "Did I doze off?" Kira responded with more chirps and a gentle lick across Katie's forehead. The other cubs were stirring now too, roused by the sound of her voice. Tarek bounced over to bat at her hand. Mila and Jin began their synchronized chirping routine. Voss watched from a short distance away, his eyes calm and thoughtful, and Drath finally relaxed his guard position, patting over to push his big head against Katie's shoulder with a rumbling sound of contentment. "I am sorry," Katie said to all of them. "I did not mean to fall asleep. You should have woken me up." But even as she said it, she understood why they had not. These cubs, these so-called predators that the galaxy feared, had seen her tired and vulnerable and had responded with care. They had protected her while she slept. They had groomed her the way they would groom their own family, because that is what she was to them. Family. Katie sat up slowly, careful not to dislodge any of the cubs still pressed against her. Her hair was a tangled mess, dampened by cub tongues and sticking out in every direction. She probably looked ridiculous. She did not care. "I love you guys," she said softly. "You know that, right? All of you." The cubs responded with chirps and nudges and happy sounds that needed no translation. They knew. They had always known. Later that day, Ambassador Vrethen came to see the image that security had captured. She studied it for a long time without speaking. When she finally looked up, there were tears in her golden eyes. "This is why we asked for a human," she said quietly. "This is what we saw in your species. The capacity to love without boundaries, to give without expecting return, to see past the claws and the fangs and the reputation, and find the hearts beneath." She looked at Katie, who was back in the enclosure playing with the cubs as if nothing special had happened. "We were alone for so long," the ambassador continued. "Feared, hated, avoided. We had given up hope that anyone would ever see us as anything other than monsters. And then your people came to the stars. And you looked at us and you did not see monsters. You saw family waiting to be found." Cortez did not know what to say. So he just stood beside her and watched Katie play with the cubs. In the weeks that followed, the image of Katie sleeping while the Kethra cubs groomed her hair became one of the most famous photographs in Coalition history. It was shared across 1,000 worlds, studied by diplomats and xenobiologists, printed in textbooks and displayed in museums. It showed what humanity could be at its best. Not conquerors. Not warriors. Not manipulators seeking power and influence. Just caregivers, protectors, family to anyone who needed one. The Bridge Initiative expanded across the galaxy. Humans were requested by dozens of species who had seen the image and wanted what the Kethra had found. The fear that had once surrounded predator species began to fade, replaced by curiosity and tentative friendship, and in the nursery on orbital station Verith, the cubs grew into strong and healthy juveniles who would eventually grow into adults and have cubs of their own. They would tell their children about the human who had loved them first, who had crawled through vents to save them, who had fallen asleep in their enclosure and let them groom her hair. They would teach their children that the galaxy was not as scary as it seemed, that there were beings out there who would see past the claws and the fangs and the glowing eyes, and find something worth loving. And Katie Brennan, who had come to the stars looking for understanding, found something even better. She found a family that stretched across the void. She found home, and she never slept alone again.